Okay, so today is the 22nd of February, and we're continuing on talking about growth hormone. Okay, so we have a couple of slides of that left, and then we'll continue on with other hormones and start talking about other endocrine glands. Okay, so if we remember, the hypothalamus releasing hormones, which then tells our anterior pituitary to release that specific hormone. Okay, so we're, as you said, continuing on with growth hormone. So we have our growth hormone releasing hormone, released from the hypothalamus, which then tells our anterior pituitary to release our growth hormone from our anterior pituitary. And so there are some effects. So we have direct effects and indirect effects. Okay, so direct effects. Well, the hormone's going to bind to receptors. It has to. That's one of the hallmarks of these hormones. They have to bind to specific receptors on particular tissues. So it binds to receptors. Notice it says, say, on the cell, so it doesn't go inside. And then it initiates changes inside the cell. Okay? Indirect effects of this on the liver and on muscle. So liver, it is going to tell the liver to basically start breaking down that glucagon, which is the nice energy storage molecule for glucose in the liver. So your liver does store some sugar. And so growth hormone, you need to have energy because you have a lot of metabolic functionings happening. So telling that liver to break down that glucagon into glucose so that the cells can use it to make energy is an important thing. Okay? And then skeletal muscle, the indirect effect there is it produces what we call somatomedins. And these are, we call them insulin-like growth factors. We won't talk a lot about these growth factors except for what's here. Okay, so on skeletal muscle, we have insulin-like growth factors that are affecting it. And so what do? They are going to bind to receptors on their target cells. So these insulin-like growth factors act a lot like a hormone. So they're not technically a hormone from like the adrenal gland, but it acts like a hormone. It binds to receptors just like regular hormones do on target cells, and then that causes changes like helping to stimulate growth in cartilage, growth in bone. So if we even think about bone growth in length, do you remember where that occurs? Is that the epiphyses, so the ends of long bones, and that epiphyseal plate is cartilage. Okay, so both of those are really important, and not just cartilage there, but in other places as well. And then also really important here, synthesis of protein. So things that are happening when growth hormone is released is that you are releasing stores of glucose from the liver. You are stimulating growth of bone and cartilage and muscle. You're also increasing the uptake of amino acids so that you can make proteins. And all of these things are happening, and it does help with growth. But growth hormone is not always released just when someone is growing. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so how do we inhibit growth hormone? Well, the hypothalamus has inhibiting hormones as well. And so if it's time to inhibit the growth hormone, hypothalamus sends out what we call the growth hormone inhibiting hormone. That term for it is somatostatin. And one way to kind of help remember what somatostatin is involved with is if we look at this portion of the word here, statin. What does that sound like or remind you of? Think about it. Ooh, people in the back are mouthing words. Stasis? She's like, oh yeah, sure. For somatostatin, so statin is kind of like stasis. It's kind of the same root word. In stasis, what does that mean? Nothing's happening. It stops. Okay, so this somatostatin works to stop the effects of growth hormone, to inhibit the release of growth hormone. Okay, so that inhibiting hormone is released from the hypothalamus, travels down to the anterior pituitary, and then because it's an inhibiting hormone, it inhibits the release of growth hormone. So no more growth hormone, no more of the effects we just talked about. So it stops the breakdown of glucagon in the liver, it stops the production of those insulin-like growth factors, all of those things that do help with metabolism and growth, it stops that. Okay? So when is growth hormone or growth hormone releasing hormone released? So here are the triggers. Okay? So growth hormone releasing hormone, or essentially, ultimately we know it's a growth hormone, is being released from our anterior pituitary. It is secreted when, so there's three things. Secreted when there's I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time talking today. Low blood sugar, okay? And that kind of makes sense if we know that one of the target tissues for growth hormone is the liver. And the liver has that glucose storage molecule. So if you have low blood glucose, one of the things that growth hormone will do is release that sugar. So blood glucose levels, growth hormone can be released to help increase that. Stress also will cause the release of growth hormone. And then in addition, if you are ingesting certain amino acids, especially like the ones our body can't synthesize, your body can't synthesize, there's some you have to get from food, that may also trigger the release of growth hormone, releasing hormone, because now it's like, ooh, we have these amino acids we didn't have before, and these are essential to build this protein. Let's go. Let's do this thing. So those are three things that kind of stimulate the secretion and release of growth hormone. What stimulates the inhibition of growth hormone, or somatostatin, so remember our word. This inhibiting hormone is released in response to high blood glucose levels. So it doesn't do anything to take sugar in. Okay, so the big thing that helps decrease blood sugar levels is our insulin, and that comes from the pancreas, and we'll talk about that coming up. So growth hormone can't do anything if the blood sugar levels are too high. So that will inhibit growth hormone secretion. And I'm sure you've heard of this before, that you grow most of the time when you're asleep. And the reason for that is growth hormone is at its peak levels. You have the most in your system while you are sleeping. And so that's why parents all over the world, either intentionally or just because they're exhausted, want their kids to go to bed at a decent hour, is that it's good for them. They need the sleep. Their body needs to re-energize and all that great stuff, and it helps with memory and all sorts of things. But especially as kids, that's when the growth hormone is being released. That's when all of that growing is happening in their sleep. And so sleep is incredibly important for the development of a child. If you don't get enough sleep, along with a bunch of other things, you can see physical changes. So sleep is important. Even if you're past the growing age, sleep is important. Okay, we're going to move on to a new hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and so this starts its journey up in the pituitary gland, okay? But if you remember, all anterior pituitary hormones are tropins, which means that they are going to act on a different tissue, okay? So they are going somewhere else to cause their primary change. So adrenocorticotropic hormone starts with the hypothalamus. I'm sorry, I said pituitary. Got to back up. Starts with the hypothalamus with the releasing hormone. So corticotropic releasing hormone from the hypothalamus then causes our anterior pituitary to release the real hormone, the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Oh, maybe I missed part of the word. No, I did it. So the abbreviation is ACTH. Okay, it's a big one. And so what does this do? Well, adrenocorticotropic hormone travels through the bloodstream and goes to the adrenal glands. Okay, let's see if I can write without screwing this up. Specifically, the adrenal cortex. Okay? The adrenal medulla is under control of the nervous system. Okay? Only the adrenal cortex is under the control of the endocrine system. Okay? So, if adrenocorticotropic hormone is released, it travels to the adrenal cortex, the outer layer of the adrenal gland. And so, when that adrenocorticotropic hormone binds to cells of the adrenal cortex, it will cause the release of cortisol. And cortisol is a steroid hormone and often is released in times of stress, specifically long-term stress. So probably most of you, if not all of you in this room, including myself, are probably secreting quite a bit of cortisol. It's a little stressful. But we'll talk about the effects of that and what it can do in a bit. Okay, so that comes through the adrenal cortex. Also causes aldosterone, okay, to be released as well from the same region. So what do these two hormones do? Well, first of all, start with the first step, binds to melanocytes on the skin, in the skin. Do you remember what melanocytes do? They're what? Well, they are responsible for our different skin colors in this classroom. So what do melanocytes make? That melanin, yes. They make melanin. And besides having the effect of giving us this wonderful shade of colors, what is it melanin specifically doing in our skin? Do you remember that? What is its job? Oh, it's okay. It helps protect the underlying cells where cell division is happening from UV rays and UV damage from the sun. So it blocks it out, helps prevent, mutations and things that could cause cancer. So melanin is important, very, very important. So this is interesting. These corticotropic hormones bind to melanocytes. Okay, and so one effect is that it will increase the production of melanin. If you increase the production of melanin, you will see a change in skin color if there's enough production of melanin. And we'll talk about why in a bit. We'll come back to that. We have a disorder we're going to talk about that. But for now, we're going to talk about another set of hormones, gonadotropins. Okay, and so these are tropic hormones from the adrenal gland that are going to affect the gonads of males and females. And the gonadotropins are the same for males and females. And so luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Those are the two gonadotropins that are released from your anterior pituitary. Same ones for males and females. Different effects on males and females. Okay. So, to back up, gonadotropins, notice here, okay, promote growth and function of the gonads. So, it can start all the way from releasing the right sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, and causing primary sex characteristics, secondary sex characteristics, the maturation of sperm or egg, all of that stuff, and maintenance of the gonads or the ovaries and the testes and making sure things are functioning properly. So, but they do that for both males and females. So, regulating production of gametes. So, gametes, sperm. What's the other one? Sperm for males. What do we have for females? Egg or oocyte. We'll say egg for now. Oocyte, we'll use that word more later. And reproductive hormones. So down below we have our reproductive hormones. The most prevalent one in males is testosterone. The most prevalent ones in females is estrogen and progesterone. And it's interesting again that these guys, these luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, work on both males and females and have different effects, even though they're the same hormones. Okay, so the gonadotropin-releasing hormone is going to come from the hypothalamus because all releasing hormones come from the hypothalamus. And then that's going to go to your anterior pituitary and tell it to release the luteinizing hormone and the follicle-stimulating hormone. In addition, there is another hormone that is a tropic hormone from the anterior pituitary, or prolactin. And we've already talked about this plays a role in milk production in females. And so this is also controlled directly by the hypothalamus. You have a releasing hormone and an inhibiting hormone. Okay? And so the releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone are going to help regulate the secretion of prolactin and the production of milk in a female's mammary glands. Okay? So, sorry, these questions are already answered. I wish I could cover it up. But, so let's just go over the question anyways. It says the release of, so that's adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone from, oh, I forgot my abbreviation. See, we all do it. Corticotropin releasing hormone. It wasn't defined. I'm sorry. So look at those questions real quick. Corticotropin releasing. Sorry, I just have to write this. So if this hormone is released, what is the anterior pituitary going to do as a response of this releasing hormone? So A says releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, which causes cortisol secretion. B releases prolactin-releasing hormone, which causes lactation. Release follicle-stimulating hormone to stimulate ovulation. So which hormone is affected by this one? A. Do we have concurrence? Do we all concur? Yes. And I did hear a phone ding, so make sure it's on silent, okay? Thank you. Yeah, so you guys were right. I know, I'm sorry about the clicker. We talked about that. Once we get this Wi-Fi'd and not on a wire, we can walk around. Hopefully the next step is to get the clickers working again. So thank you for your patience with that. Okay, so we're moving to the thyroid gland. And we have talked a little bit about thyroid gland way back in the beginning of the first semester when we were talking about minerals and essential minerals and elements that we need in our body in small amounts. Well, the mineral that we need in the thyroid gland is iodine. You guys remember that? Yes. So we need iodine in order for our thyroid gland to be able to produce the hormones your body needs. Okay? And an interesting fact, notice it's bold and underlined and italicized. All three big things I can do. The thyroid gland is the only endocrine gland that stores hormone. So it makes the hormone and it stores it. The other ones make as it's needed. Okay? This one makes it and stores it. Notice that active transport is needed to get iodine into the cell. That makes sense. It's probably not going to easily diffuse through the plasma membrane, so you're going to have to use energy to get it in. So there are two kind of regions to the thyroid gland. We have the follicles and parafollicular cells. And so I know this picture is small, but I'm going to try to draw this, highlight some follicles. So they kind of look like adipose cells, those bubbles. Okay, each of those is a follicle, okay, the big circular structures. And so, okay, those are our follicles, and they secrete what we call thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is important, and you need two important ingredients to make this, iodine and tyrosine. So you need iodine and tyrosine to make what we call T3 and T4. These are the two thyroid hormones. Okay, and once T3 and T4 are made, they're released into the bloodstream as needed, because remember, the thyroid gland stores our hormones. Now, here's the deal. If we don't have enough iodine, what's going to happen? how does that affect the overall? We have this whole stream of events. Yeah, we know the ultimate outcome. You could get a goiter. But what happens before that? If we don't have enough iodine, we can't make our thyroid hormones. We can't make T3 and T4, which have a major function with our metabolism. So often we find that people who don't have enough iodine, or usually we'll start with the whole not having enough iodine, you won't be able to make these hormones, which will have a direct effect on your metabolism and leads to all sorts of side effects, which we will get to. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I'm sorry. So T3 and T4, they're hormones. They're released in the blood. Okay, so what's happening in the parafollicular cells? So the parafollicular cells are in the spaces between these little follicles, so these little dark spots, okay? Maybe I should have colored them different, but so the little dark spots in between, or the little gaps in between the follicles, are the parafollicular cells. They secrete a hormone you guys have heard before. They secrete calcitonin. I told you this was going to come back. So, calcitonin is made by the thyroid gland, has a direct effect on our blood calcium levels. So, specifically, good reminder, reduces blood calcium levels. Okay? How are ways you can reduce blood calcium levels? Do you remember that? How do we get rid of extra calcium? There's 3 places or 3 things that can be affected by this. Extra calcium can go on your bone, right? Bone deposited on bone. How would it affect your intestines? If you're trying to get rid of extra calcium, you don't need to be absorbing more through your intestines, so it's going to inhibit absorption of calcium. And then the last major organ affected by this is your kidney. What would your kidney do? Think about it. We have extra calcium. What could the kidney do for us? Whoopsies, sorry. The kidney is going to excrete that extra calcium out into your urine. And out it goes. Bye-bye. Okay? So those are those 3 major organs that are affected by calcitonin and by that other hormone that affects calcium levels. Do you remember what that one's called? Don't worry, it's coming up, but it's your parathyroid hormone. Oh, yes. Okay, here we go. But backing up, trying not to get ahead of myself, let's talk about those 2 very important thyroid hormones in more detail. Okay, so we have T3 and T4 means how many iodines do we have. So T3 means 3, so iodithyronine. You try to say the word, okay? And then T4, tetra, means 4, tetraiodothyronine, or the other word for that is thyroxine. So much easier to say. Okay, so these 2 hormones are very important. So we know they travel in the blood. And so one of them, the thyroxine, that's your T4, binds to thyroxine-binding globulin in the liver. Okay, that's nice. Notice here, T3 is more potent. Okay, and so what does T3 do? So remember, T4 is the one that binds in the liver. T3 is the one we spend more time talking about. This binds to, notice this, intracellular receptor molecules. Is intra inside the cell or outside the cell? Inside. Excellent. Okay, so it binds to receptors inside the cell, and its job, protein synthesis. Bam! So this, if we remember back from the beginning of the chapter, hormones that bind to receptors inside the cell have direct effects on what's happening inside the cell and can activate a gene and cause production of new proteins. And so that's exactly what T3 is doing. Okay, so effects of this hormone beyond just protein synthesis, you increase the amount of glucose, fat, and protein metabolism, so the breakdown of these things. And In addition, body temperature. So people, for example, who may not have enough of this hormone, you may find that they have a harder time managing their weight. Their metabolism slows down. They may actually have a lower than normal body temperature. Those are all symptoms of what we would call hypothyroidism. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is a slide coming up with all of that good stuff on it. But so it's really, these hormones are incredibly important, okay? Our thyroid gland has a very important job. If it's not functioning, you're going to feel sick and tired and yucky and depressed likely as well because you're so tired. And so often when people feel depressed and tired, doctors will do blood tests. Two of the blood tests they look at is vitamin D levels and your thyroid hormone levels. Because if either of those are off, that's the first thing doctors are going to try to fix to see if that helps all of your symptoms. So it's like this rule in medicine to always check for those two things first before you prescribe someone strong medicine like for antidepressants or something. Let's check our thyroid levels. Okay. So there is a handout here, and so it says, know the regulation of T3 and T4. So I'm giving you that responsibility to study on your own. But last point I wanted to make here is that normal growth of tissues, of many tissues, rely on the thyroid hormones being present. So if the thyroid hormones are not functioning or not present, or you're not getting enough iodine, you're not going to get normal growth of tissues, and that's going to be a problem. Okay. All right, so let's talk about disorders of the thyroid gland. So we're starting with hyperthyroidism first. Okay, so hyperthyroidism, hyper implying too much. Okay, too much. So too much thyroid hormone causes Graves' disease. Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease. Autoimmune essentially means your body is attacking itself. And in this case, it could be that it's attacking the thyroid gland or cells within the thyroid gland. And so autoimmune diseases are sneaky little things. So this is autoimmune. It can be treated, but some of the side effects, you get these kind of almost bulgy looking eyes. That is a side effect. You do get swollen thyroid gland, not like a goiter. Perhaps if it progressed long enough, it could turn into a goiter. But then also problems with sleeping, because again, this is metabolism, okay? So their body is running on high, they're tired, having problems with sleeping. They still have problems with weight, and a host of other disorders. But so that would be our hyperthyroidism. Hypothyroidism, which I've kind of hinted at already, can be caused when there is not enough iodine. But iodine, remember, is necessary to make the thyroid hormones. So essentially, we are not producing enough thyroid hormones. That could be because of iodine, or it could be because the thyroid gland is not functioning properly. Okay, because that can happen. And so, yes, both of those are mentioned here. So this can result from lack of iodine or not enough iodine, or the thyroid gland being defective. And so this lady is showing a goiter. I did do some reading on this lately, and I did not specifically do a search to see if it can be reversed, the goiter itself, but these can be, but the hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism can be treated. And usually it is picked up way before someone gets a goiter like that. Okay, so like if we look at the previous slide, you might see a little bit of swelling, and that's enough for a doctor in a country like ours to notice and treatment to happen, and you'll be okay. The goiter is essentially, it's your thyroid gland, it's swollen, it's trying to accommodate, trying to make more hormones, and it can't. And so it's swollen, it's inflamed. That's why you have that. That's why people have that goiter. which is unfortunate. And again, I think I mentioned this before, that you really only see goiters in countries that don't have good medical care. They usually don't progress to what you see in this picture unless you're in places that are far from modern medicine, and then you may see it. Okay, so parathyroid gland, and, oh, I'm still getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Calcitonin is from the thyroid gland, so let's just make sure we remember thyroid. And then the parafollicular cells, so the little cells in between the follicles, is what makes the calcitonin, which helps decrease our blood calcium levels. Okay, so really important we remember this. Decreasing our blood calcium levels, it's triggered when the calcium levels in our blood is too high. Primary tissue, you guys got that one, is bone. And so if we have too much calcium, one of the things we can do is, well, notice this. So it decreases the activity of osteoclasts. Do you remember what osteoclasts do? They break down bone. Right. So if we decrease their activity, they can't break down bone and release more calcium. Okay, so you stopped those guys. And then we have our osteoblasts, which build bone. So what can we do for our osteoblast? You increase their lifespan. They live longer, so they are able to deposit bone for a longer period of time. So that extra calcium, the big place where the tissue is targeted, is going to be bone, and it is going to help osteoblast live longer and deposit more calcium, and basically preventing the osteoclasts from releasing the calcium into the bloodstream. So that's one way to decrease the calcium levels. And we also talked about the kidney and decreasing absorption of calcium in the intestines. Okay. Finally, the parathyroid gland. I'm sorry I keep trying to talk about this one. Parathyroid gland is found on the backside of the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland kind of like wraps around your throat, okay? And so this picture here, this one on the top, is showing you the posterior view. So here's your trachea. Your esophagus runs behind your trachea. And so what you're seeing there is the thyroid gland wrapping around the backside of your trachea, your pharynx and larynx. And on the backside, you have 4 little independent glands. And so all 4 of those combined, we call them the parathyroid glands. So I've circled those there. They're small. They're small little suckers, okay? But they're mighty. Small but mighty, like my dog. Okay, sorry. Parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone, okay? Parathyroid hormone does the opposite as calcitonin. Remember, those are the 2 that help regulate blood calcium levels. And so we already know targets bone, kidney, and intestines. Those are the 3 major players. So if our blood calcium levels are too low, parathyroid hormone is going to be released. It is going to affect osteoclast activity. It's going to increase osteoclast activity to release more bone. So that's one. In the intestines, it's going to cause the increase of absorption of calcium through your intestines into the bloodstream to help increase your blood calcium levels. And then at the kidney, it inhibits the secretion of calcium into your urine. So it saves any calcium ions that are there. So all 3 of those things act to increase calcium levels and prevent loss of any calcium, for example, through the kidneys. Okay, so stimulate osteoclast. We know calcium reabsorption by kidneys. And how does it affect specifically the intestines is that you have to have enough vitamin D. Do you remember that? You have to have vitamin D. She's just like copying me. That's all right. You have to have vitamin D, and that essentially, in a nutshell, increases the absorption of calcium through the intestines. So today is a good day to get some vitamin D? Well, in about 10 minutes. Yeah. It's a beautiful day in February in Nebraska. And it's a good day. Go outside and eat your lunch. Enjoy the warmth. Soak in the vitamin D. Healthy bones. Okay. So, I don't think we need to cover this anymore. You need to know the relationship between calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. You need to know where they're made. This is a little bit of review for you, but I know it's still a lot of things there. But so you make sure you and remember the relationship between those. And I think you've seen this picture before. Yes, I know. It is in your handout. This is a good illustration to know, okay, what happens if blood calcium levels increase? Well, we follow this train. Follow the sequence of events. What if blood calcium levels decrease? Well, then we follow this chain of reactions. Okay? And I've kind of already told you what happens in each of those steps, but this is in graph form, and it is quite helpful. And the whole idea is that the calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are working together to maintain homeostasis or bring the body back into homeostasis. Okay? So this is a good study picture. I would use your handouts, especially if you're a visual learner. That will be very helpful for you. Okay, we're moving to adrenal glands. Okay, and the adrenal glands are found sitting on top of our kidneys. So we have two kidneys, we have two adrenal glands, and our kidneys are in the back wall, upper back wall of our abdominal pelvic cavity. So they're pretty high up there, partially hidden a little bit by the ribs. So there are two major regions to the adrenal gland. Shown in this picture here, cortex is the outer layer, and that is under hormonal control. Okay, and then we have the medulla, which is under the nervous system. I'm messing this up. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the medulla portion, or I should probably mention your kidneys are retroperitoneal. Do you guys remember what that means? Yeah, it's behind the peritoneum. You guys are awesome. Okay, so the medulla, the middle section of the adrenal gland, is under the control of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? And so sympathetic, remember, fight or flight. So it's going to be releasing hormones that are involved in helping you with fight or flight response. Okay? So specifically epinephrine and norepinephrine. We've talked about what these do before. And let me double check here. Yeah, we'll talk more about specific effects on the next slide. Okay? And then in the cortex, the middle section, there's actually 3 layers to the cortex. And so this is what you're seeing in this picture here. And so, zona glomerulosa. So the first one is the most superficial layer. And then the middle layer is your zona fasciculata. These are great names. I mean, okay, that's the middle section. And the innermost, or the deepest section of the adrenal cortex is the zona reticularis. I'm going to do you a favor and not ask you to memorize those layers for your exam when it does come, okay? It's good to know there are layers. That's what I want you to know, okay? So, let's talk more about the hormones in the adrenal medulla. So these are under the control of our sympathetic, right? If I can spell, you know what I meant. There's an E right there. Okay, sympathetic nervous system. The hormones that are secreted are considered neurohormones because it is under the control of the nervous system. Okay, and this is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Notice this. They function through the G protein mechanisms. These hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are not tropins. Okay? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're not. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system is stimulated when, what kind of situation might cause it to be stimulated? Throw something out. Yeah, like, but can you give me an example of something that might get your adrenaline pumping? Get scared. Okay. Like, I know people that they're scared of birds, or they're scared of... I know. Last week, I heard sounds outside at night. And I don't know, I was home alone. And I got out my pepper spray gel. I know, I sleep with it. And I had a few minutes of like, what's going on? What can you imagine if someone actually came in? Okay, so there's all sorts of things that could stimulate you being scared. Or let's say, here's another one, an 8-year-old boy intent on scaring his mother. Any way possible. I get probably too much adrenaline release or epinephrine on a regular basis thanks to my child trying to scare me. Jumping out in front of me, jumping off of things that could break you. Yeah, those are my examples. They're not very exciting, I know. Okay, notice, so I mentioned this, G protein mechanism. These are short-lived, okay? They don't last very long. And previous to this, we did talk about which hormones are more likely to be short-lived and which ones are more likely to last longer. We talked about half-lives and the relationship between being lipid soluble or not. Remember that? If you don't, that's in the beginning half of the chapter, and I would encourage you to review that and study it. Okay? So these two hormones are short-lived. Let's say you narrowly missed a car accident. Your epinephrine is going to be released, but it doesn't last very long. You feel it, and then it slowly goes away, and you're good. Okay? And that's great. You don't want a hormone that makes you feel all hyped up and, to last a really long time, do you? Only if you're trying to survive for your life, but you don't want it to last longer than necessary. Okay? So, what does epinephrine actually do? Increases blood levels of glucose. So let's think about that. If we increase our glucose levels, that means we have more fuel to make energy, to, let's say, fuel our muscles for survival. So it's giving us sugar we need for making energy. So that's really important. Increases fat breakdown as well. Now don't get any ideas of, let's get scared so we can lose fat. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so this is just to provide the ingredients to make ATP. So for energy, remember that lovely reaction where we have oxygen and glucose. It goes into our cellular respiration, and then we have our products of carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So glucose is essential in that, and you're releasing that so you can make energy. In addition, you have blood vessels that are dilating. Specifically, I know that was silly, specifically in the skeletal and cardiac muscles. So it's not dilating everywhere, it's dilating in your skeletal muscles and cardiac muscles. Now, what would that do for you? More blood. Yes, more blood to our muscles and more blood to our heart. And so I know it's silly, but just answer me anyways. So what effect will that give you, or what benefit will that give you? More blood pumping through the heart. You're getting more blood to the heart muscle itself so it can function, it can pump harder and pump more. And then, you're dilating the vessels to your skeletal muscle. That means you're getting more oxygen to your skeletal muscle, which is that other ingredient you need to make energy. So you are able to make a ton of energy in your skeletal muscles for fight or flight. Okay? and your heart is going to be able to beat more effectively and work harder in that time period. Have you ever noticed when your adrenaline is released, your heart starts pounding? That would be because of that dilation and the effects of epinephrine. So notice another effect is increasing the heart rate. So getting more blood to the heart muscle itself is important. And it also increases the force of contraction. So it's increasing your blood pressure as well. Okay, so right here, know the triggers, target tissues, and effects that we've talked about today. We have very few slides left, which is good for us. I know that